Welcome to episode 821 of IMTalk, your weekly fix in all things Iron. Rightio team, welcome along to episode 821 of IMTalk with Coach John Newsom and Bevan James Isles. He's not in the studio today. He's at home because he's got issues.
I'm being considerate. Don't want to give you the old COVID, Bevan.
He's had the Rona, but when did you have the Rona?
I'm clear of the Rona, but I'm still just being a little bit cautious this week. So, week and a half ago.
How do you think you got it?
I know how I got it, but I'm not going to disclose that. But it was literally just going into someone's house who'd got it the day before, and then next morning woke up with a sore throat.
Drits. Okay, IMTalk is proudly brought to you by
our awesome patrons.
We've got Michael Don't Back Down Baker,
Paula Wave Crasher Ryan,
got Sam the Wild One Wolves. The Wild One actually helped me make some videos on the weekend. I was doing some videos. Actually, I'll tell you a funny story at the end of it. For my book, we did some promotional videos and he was helping me out with that. So he's a good young man, Sam is. And this week's show, we've got some news. We've got a hot topic of the week. We've got an interview.
We are talking to Mark Elliott, he's the coach, or formerly the coach of Bevan Doherty, who is, for those that you can't recall, he's a two-time Olympic medalist. He also led the Triathlon New Zealand program for a while and also the Cycling New Zealand program for a while. And I was really keen to talk to him just about the high performance environment and maybe give us plebs a bit of an insight into what it's actually really like for high performance athletes.
Yeah, he was actually my first triathlon coach. I used him before I used you.
Yeah.
So he wouldn't remember who the crap I was, but because he basically just write me a program and I'd talk to him every kind of 3 months. Anyway, let's talk about news because it's a big week. We're going to have a few races. We've been away for a couple of weeks, so we're going to catch up on a couple of races, but obviously there's a pretty big race coming up soon. So Ironman Texas happened when we were away. Did you watch the ending of the men's race, John?
I did watch the ending of the men's race, so that was pretty interesting. If we go to the boys first, there was it ended up being 13 seconds in it, so not much at all, but that 13 seconds exploded a bit in the last couple of 100 meters because prior to that it was a head-to-head battle. It was pretty interesting.
Well, so I didn't know the result. Someone sent me through a link saying make sure you go to this point. I think it was Peter Colson sent through saying go to this point and watch the race. So I kind of went to it and it was probably 5K from the end. That was shoulder to shoulder. It did look like Hoffman looked more comfortable. But at the same time, who knows what's going to happen in those types of races, eh? But then basically, it's probably about 500 meters from the finish, wasn't it?
At most, I'd say, at most.
He kind of put the foot down. You could just see Magnus was just cramping a little bit when the speed got to that next level, didn't he?
Yeah, so the way the race panned out was Magnus Ditlev was on Ironman debut, and as kind of you would expect, he managed to get to the front and was riding away, and then managed to get a puncture or really slashed his tire and had all sorts of troubles fixing that and getting that off. So then, as it turned out, he ended up coming off the bike either very close or with Ben Hoffman, and ended up running the majority of the marathon together. And I got to say, first up, before discussing the finishing sprint, for him to run a 2:40.56 on debut was pretty impressive. He's a very ungamely looking runner because he's so tall and gangly.
Lean and lanky, isn't he?
Yeah, he doesn't look like he's running fast, but and from the point where Bevan and I probably watched, which was the last 10 minutes of the race, they looked like they were running really, really slowly and then cranked it up to the sprint finish. So they must have been moving a lot quicker early on. It's an interesting one.
So Magnus top, but so what, he probably would have rode about 5 minutes faster, you think?
I don't know exactly how long he was on the side of the road, but he looked like he was, the footage that I saw looked like he was having quite a bit of difficulty. So I think he did have to wait for a while. It wasn't like the aid people were right there and able to help him out. I think he did. It was multiple minutes.
Wow.
So yeah,
he's a real deal, really, isn't he?
Yeah, so that was a really strong performance by him. Again, he's a bigger guy, so whether he's going to bigger guys often struggle a bit in Kona, but if you can run a 240 anywhere in the world, irrespective of your cycling and swimming, you're generally going to do pretty well. And because he's such a weapon on the bike, it was pretty impressive. So you'd think 7:58.11 on debut is pretty awesome, and you take a handful of minutes off that, and could have been a lot quicker. So good on him. So the end result, Ben Hoffman was first in 7:57.58, a few seconds back to Magnus Ditlev, and then another 10 minutes back to Jesper Svensson. On the female side of it, it was a bit of a
I got a question.
Yep.
So with Magnus, he's a big dude, but he's very lean. And we think of some of the big dudes in Kona, they're often quite stocky as well. You think of like Tuilban, all these big guys, they're often quite big units. Does that work against him or work for him that he's leaner?
Oh, it works for him, but he's still, got a pretty big surface area. But we see some big athletes do pretty well. We don't necessarily see big athletes winning Kona. I'm just trying to think of the biggest people, like Farasol Sultan was fairly solid from memory, but he
wasn't that tall, was he?
Yeah, he's probably the biggest that I can recall. Well, Jan Frodeno's obviously pretty tall, but he's very lean as well. So
you'd probably say he is the biggest, because Hoffman, the other thing is Hoffman's quite a small man. So the comparison, maybe Magnus isn't as big as what we think he is, because Hoffman's, maybe.
Well, Ben Hoffman says in his stats, he's 178. I thought that's taller than me.
Okay, definitely is 195. Okay, so I'm 181. I'm basically under. Okay, so he is tall.
Yeah,
he's only 24.
79 kgs. Yeah, no, he's a young fella. So good on him. So we will see him. Pretty sure he got a Kona ticket for that. So we'll probably see him in Kona later in the year. On the female side, it was Jocelyn Corley. Did it. She didn't look very comfortable, but she won by 12 minutes over Lauren Brandon and Joanna Ritter in third place. So good to see Jocelyn Corley also clipping her ticket for Kona if she didn't already have her slot. I know she did some racing late last season, but probably not quite as fast as we'd expect her. Having said that, 8:58 is not mucking around. But we know that she's a quality runner, and she only ran a 3:13. One of the challenges they had at this race was, it was fairly windy on the bike. So one direction they were pushing into a pretty heavy wind, and the other direction spinning out of control a bit, even though it was a pretty flat course. So
you would say,
racing.
You would say traditionally, females are about 40 minutes behind the men. So they're basically an hour behind the guys. So it was a bit of a slower female race.
Yeah, normally you think Jocelyn Corley is going to be closer to 3 hours. So you take, 10 minutes off that. She would have been 8:50-ish, which is probably more we'd expect for her. But hey, still sub 9 hours when you're not under any pressure and you've got a good lead is a good result.
You still won an Ironman, haven't you? We also had Ironman Australia happen over the last weekend. So Ironman Australia was dominated by Australian athletes. No surprise there.
And one Kiwi almost took the prize, Rebecca Clark. She hasn't looked back since she came and did my Oxman race in
there you go.
December. So I'm claiming it. That's where it all started for her. But she had a great race to push Sarah Crowley very, very close. So Rebecca Clark finished in second place in 9:07.10. Bit of a breakthrough for her. She qualified for Kona with that. And Sarah Crowley only ended up beating her by 1 minute. So they were always in the picture. Rebecca Clark did also go a little bit the wrong way in the swim. She's a very, very good swimmer. Wouldn't be surprised if she's leading the swim in Kona if she pushes it. But she took a bit of a wrong turn in the swim and swam a little bit of extra distance. So she was pretty frustrated by that. But biked with about the same time as Sarah Crowley, and then ran a 3:12, which for her is a pretty solid run split on a slightly tricky course. So a bit of a breakthrough result for her, and Sarah Crowley will be happy to be in the winner's circle as well. So they had a big gap over third and fourth.
One thing I do say, John, is they don't have the Oxman in the PTO's results.
Disappointing.
Mate, she won the Port of Tauranga, so she's obviously having a pretty good year, but they don't have the Oxman in there, mate.
Probably because I wasn't dishing out a lot of prize money compared to some other races.
Okay, so we also had the men's race.
Jack Moody. So we had some Kiwis finishing in fourth and fifth there. Ben Phillips was in fourth. He's a brother of Mike Phillips. Jack Moody was in third. Josh Amberger was leading off the bike, but only ran a 3:02 to fade away to second place. And Tim Van Berkel took it out with a 52-minute swim, 4:32 on the bike, and a 2:45 run for an 8:15.13. Getting towards probably towards the end of his career as Tim Berkel. He is 37 years old, and yeah, so he'll be pretty stoked to be back in the winner's circle, I think.
We also had a challenge race, the Challenge Morgan Gran Canaria.
Yeah, and probably the one interesting thing from here was firstly Mika Nude took that out in 3:43. It was only a half, and Sarah Pelez Sala took that out in 4:10. But probably more importantly, there's a couple of athletes that didn't necessarily go that quick. Nicholas Spurg was only in fourth place. Whether or not there was some particular reason for that or not, I'm not quite sure, but doesn't really bode well for the sub 8. And then on the boys' side, Jonathan Brownlee, who is focusing on half distance races now, exploded on the run. He was with the leaders off the bike and then completely detonated on the run. And so he really hasn't shown a lot of promise over the half Ironman distance in a field like this. They're really good athletes, but
105, it must have been short.
I haven't checked if it's short or not, but that does seem insanely quick. And 107 for second place. But Jonathan Brownlee hasn't really put his mark on 70.3.
So has he actually officially moved away from the World Triathlon Series racing now?
Yes.
Okay, so he's purely 70.3.
Yeah.
And do you think
he might still do some?
Do you think we're going to see him in long course?
Don't know. Haven't followed that one yet. I think he's starting with 70.3s and he'll take it from there. But yeah, he's not setting the world on fire yet.
We also had another challenge race, Racone.
Challenge Racone, yep, that was on last weekend. Emma Pallant-Brown took that out on the female side, and then the boys' side, Thomas Steger took that out.
Okay, so there's been lots of racing. So let's dig into the big one, guys, because it's not all about the World Championships this weekend. We've got a race coming up. Oh, so we're teasing the World Championships. What's this race coming up this weekend, John?
Got the Himalayan X-Tri this weekend, the world's highest extreme triathlon. So it's going to be interesting. You're not going up Mount Everest or anything like that, but you're doing an iron distance race or close to it, 3.8K swim, 175K bike and 43K run, 8,900 meters of overall elevation gain. Pretty sure this race has been on the scene for the couple of the years sort of with COVID going around, but hasn't happened. So this is going to be the first time it happens, which is kind of cool. Go to the Himalayas, and it'll be awesome. So check it out.
Okay, well, the bigger piece.
One other bit of news that you scammed over there, Bevan, there was Wahoo have also acquired RGT, which is Road Grand Tours. So they're RGT is another online platform, similar to Zwift and some of the others. It's just a really interesting time in the sort of online market where you've got Wahoo, who have traditionally been a hardware manufacturer, the Wahoo and bike computers and other components and so on. And now they're sort of moving into the software space. They've sort of first launched their Wahoo system, which is an online platform using clips like Sufferfest and a few others. But this is definitely a move in towards Zwift, because RGT is more or less like Zwift. It's certainly not in the same stratosphere as Zwift. That's just, it's like comparing Netflix is kind of like the Zwift, and then you've got all those other sort of peripheral ones, and RGT is one of those peripheral ones, which is nowhere near as good as Zwift yet, but now they've got a hardware sort of manufacturer behind them and probably a hell of a lot more money. We might see this space shaken up a little bit.
It'd be interesting about, because surely Zwift makes a lot more money than Wahoo.
Zwift's massive, but they're now trying to step into the hardware side of it as well, with various different Zwift things sort of in the mix apparently, and so they may come out with Zwift bikes and things like that. So then they are really going head to head. So yeah, it's going to be interesting times ahead.
Yeah, it really is, isn't it? Okay, well, let's dig into the big one, guys. This weekend coming up, we've got the World Championships. Seems odd saying the World Championships this year and at this time of year, and also in a different location. It's the Ironman World Championships St. George. When's it going to be? It's going to be happening Saturday, the 7th of May, starting at 6:15 and 6:20 in Utah time. If you're in New Zealand, that's midnight. In Sydney, that's 10 p.m. And the UK, they've got a great time, 1 p.m. in the afternoon. How to watch it? You can go to Ironman Now on Facebook, and it's not going to be on Outside Sports, which is quite interesting, isn't it? Because they've been promoting that relationship, haven't they?
Yeah, they're only doing 70.3. So I was quite relieved when I saw that, because I thought if it's on that Outside Sports, Kiwi is going to be completely screwed, because unless you want to get up in the middle of the night, you ain't seeing any of it because you can't rewind. So yeah, no, it's great that the Iron distance races are still on Ironman Now.
Okay, so let's talk about the swimming, John. It could be a bit cold.
Could be a bit fresh, but it doesn't sound like it's going to be freezing, so the swim is kind of like a dog leg shape, which may help things a little bit in terms of breaking it up. So in Kona, you basically have a straight drag to the turnaround buoys. You've got 2 turnaround buoys, and that's a straight drag back. So once you sort of take off and you settle into your pack, it's relatively plain sailing. So by this swim being a dog leg with a couple of extra turns in it, hopefully it might break things up a little bit and string it out a little bit more in the swim. So yeah, the swim is going to be a lot fresher, and the wetsuits side of it will make it different as well. Obviously Kona normally is non-wetsuit, and so some of the weaker swimmers, perhaps the differential to them might be not as great as what it is to Kona. So it's certainly going to help the weaker swimmers. But with the elites, some of them do not handle the cold conditions very well. So that might have a little bit of an impact as well.
So then the bike, it's interesting because Kona's bike course isn't the most challenging course in regards to the hilliness of it. You definitely get the winds and the temperature, so it definitely plays the game in a different way. But this is a more challenging bike course than what we'd see in Kona.
Yeah, plenty more hills, and the good thing is the hills, it's backloaded, so the big climbs and the one they talk about, Snow Canyon, all that sort of stuff is more towards the end. So there's plenty of climbing in the lead into that to sort of fatigue people. But yeah, I think the really good design of this course is, if we want to see things broken up coming off the bike, then that should happen with those hills, you would hope. There's a couple of scenarios that might happen on the bike. It might stay together reasonably well, but because of the nature of the bike course, a bit like Kona, it could really fatigue some of the runners. So so it's awesome that they've got a really good course. When we had the 70.3 last year, we saw Gustav Eden just crush it on the latter part of the bike going up through the hills. So whether or not we see the same this weekend, who knows? But I think the main thing is they've come up with a really good course design for both, obviously, the age groupers and the pros. And if you can't break things up on this sort of course, then you've really got to go extreme.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? Because like next week, I wouldn't be surprised if we're having a conversation saying this was the year the bikers took it. Because what we traditionally see is very rarely a gun cyclist will break away and win Kona. Tends to be gun cyclists break away and then the runners get them in the end. Whereas with the course being a bit more challenging, maybe the gun cyclists just get that little bit more of an advantage, which means that they are going to get that, get the win in the end. You might see, because often also what you see is you see one gun cyclist do well. They might get the win, but you might see this year we might get a podium which is mainly all cyclists.
Yeah, I don't think so, but let's wait and see. The thing that's in the back of everybody's minds is you just got these runners now that can just go so fast. So, when you've got the Norwegians and you're thinking, sweet, I've got an 8-minute lead off them off the bike, they could quite easily run, a mid 230s, given it's not going to be Kona conditions, which means you've got to be running, a mid to low 240 to sort of hold on. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. I hope something like that happens where we do get several riders off the front with some really healthy leads, and then we're going to have to see some pretty ferocious running coming in from behind.
Like, I'd love it if you had a pack of cyclists going strong to the finish, and a pack of runners chasing them down. And if you imagine if the timing of that, if it get highly unlikely this is going to happen, but it'd be cool if it happened.
Yeah, and the run course is tricky, so we might not see those amazingly fast times. It is plenty of up and down on the run. So you've got four climbs. It's not crazy steep or anything like that from the look of it, but certainly it's enough to break things up, when you're on the climbs, and then the downhills is just going to beat the living crap out of people's legs. So I think we're going to see some fairly crippled athletes, both age groupers and pros, once this race is done and dusted.
So the disappointing thing about this year is we are missing some of the rock stars. Men's side of things, Frodo's out, Gomez, although who knows about him anyway, but Langer and Skipper, those are, particularly, who knows if Gomez would have been there, but Frodeno, Langer and Skipper, they influenced the race.
Oh, massively. They're bloody dropping like flies, I tell you that. So, and more have dropped out now. So Laura Phillip has been ill as well. Lucy Charles is obviously out. Sarah Crowley raced last weekend. She wasn't going to be at full fitness for this anyway. The Norwegians apparently have had head colds. So yeah, athletes are dropping like flies. Now, it's still going to be a high quality field, but I just don't recall this number of athletes dropping out previously. We go into Kona. There's always one or two, but it just seems like there's been quite a few. And as you said, it's the big hitters that are out. So they're going to could have massively influenced this race. So it opens the door for others. I did a quick count on the females field on tryrating.com on Torsten's site. And I only counted 25 starters or so, around about 25. And I'm sure there'll be one or two that might drop out between now and race day. So a lot of people out. Still should be a fantastic race. On the female side of it, you'd probably think, it's likely to be Anne Haug probably is, she's a defending champion, and Kat Matthews. But when we say based on form, nobody's got any form because there's hardly been any racings this season. So there's a few 70.3s, but that's why it's really hard to predict this one. And it's going
to be fascinating to see how Daniela goes. She's come on, let's be honest. Her pedigree is amazing. She hasn't been of that pedigree in the last kind of 12 months, but you can't write her off.
No. So it's going to be a really interesting race. I think that'll be Anne Haug, Reef, and who did I just say before Bevan? Kat Matthews. What
about Bolter? Because with the field being smaller and a lot of the guns gone, when you look at that, who could be a bolter who could actually take the win?
I can't see anybody on that list when I scroll through here. I'm just having a look here. No, it's official, Bevan. There will be no bolter.
Okay. What about the men's race? So the men's race is, we've still got rock stars there. Probably stronger overall field than the female field, but we have lost, like Langer, Frodeno, and Skipper. So is it Brownlee's year?
I'm going no, but there's definitely a few more question marks in the boys' side of it. Everyone's going to say the two Norwegians are the hot favourites, but you've got a lot of people who could be bolters, or Brownlee. You certainly wouldn't say he's a bolter, but then you've got guys like Daniel Beckengard who could do awesomely. Braden Curry, you'd expect him to be, in sort of the top five. I'd be surprised if he won it.
Lionel Sanders.
Christian Hogenhagen, Lionel Sanders, Keenlay's down there as well. Can't imagine him doing, being the number one. Sam Long, and then we've got our Cam Worth. Haven't seen him racing, so I think there's a lot more question marks on the guys' side. I think there's definitely question marks on the female side, but it's what order that top three might be in. And on the boys' side of it, I think there could be quite a few, surprises in the top five.
Who do you want to win? Not who do you think, who do you want?
I'd love to see Brownlee probably take it out, and
that'd be cool.
That'd be pretty cool, and just add a bit of fire to the sub 7 and make that a bit more realistic. It's never fun seeing a champion capitulate on the run or anything like that. So that's what I'd like. That's what I'd like to see.
I'd say Brownlee and Reef. I'd like to see Reef back to form. I think if we can get in a few 2 or 3 more years out of Reef, that'd be really awesome. Okay, John, let's pause because we've got to go do an interview. So we're going to pause now. We'll be back in a second. Okay, we are back. We've done our interview, so you'll be hearing it later on. But we do have John's short course update. Looks like there's a bit of news with the Arena Games.
Yeah, so the Arena Games was also on while we were away the week last week, and we saw Cassandra Beaugrand absolutely obliterate the field in London, and then we see Justice Nischlag take out the
Did you watch
boys'
it?
side of it. I did watch it. Yeah, look, this sort of arena games racing. Yeah, it's for me, it's something good to watch on the trainer, and not necessarily something that I'd sit there and mull over for too long. But I think it's it's just another nice little string to the bow to our sport, but I don't necessarily see it as the future of racing. One interesting thing with the second round of the Arena Games, Bevan, they must have been listening to you after round one, which was in Munich, and they turned it into non-drafting. So that made it quite a bit different, and it really meant the race was over pretty quickly on the female side. But I don't know, it was a little bit different. It wasn't quite as exciting because things spread out pretty quickly and people were out the back door very quickly. But it made it for a much more...
I watched it as well. Were you surprised for Alex Yee's performance? Like, you would have picked him to take it out.
Yes and no. You know, he's bloody good. I can't imagine he's in top shape yesterday at this stage. And this guy, Justice Nischlag, has won quite a few races before, so he's pretty awesome. So not totally surprised by this. And it just seems to me, I've never run on one of these treadmills, but some athletes seem to perform exceptionally well on those treadmills compared to others. And Cassandra Beaugrand is certainly one of them. She just obliterated it, and she is a very, very good runner and has probably not really shown her true potential in sort of in real life racing. She's had some good performances, but she's one of the most talented by the look of it. So we'll see if that sort of transfers across to real world racing. So that was
they did have a good crowd. So that was
they had a better crowd.
Yeah.
It was certainly not packed to the rafters. I thought it would be a lot more packed, and it was a good sized crowd, but it was not packed. I thought there would be more there.
I have ran on. It's funny you say about the treadmill because I've never really ran them either. But when I was up in Auckland doing work last week in our practice studio, they had one of those treadmills. So I didn't go for a long run on it, but I ran for a little bit on it. The thing about it is you've got to get the foot placement right every time to keep a consistent speed because it's self-generated treadmill. So if you literally get your foot like an inch back, you slow down. So it's really about where you're landing your foot to maintain speed. It was really interesting how fluctuating the speed can be. If you just get your foot in the right place and you're landing, you've really got to put your foot quite far in front of yourself as you're landing into the landing. It's definitely a different kind of running, and it's quite intense. Yeah, I watched it. I thought it was, again, like you, it's kind of, yep, I'll watch it. Don't know if it was like, oh my God, I love this.
It might be. I think it'd be a bit different if we saw the top 10 guys in the world and top 10 females in the world all going head to head. Then I think we'd be a bit more vested. But when you're seeing sort of 2.5 minutes between first and 10th in a race over such a short distance, it's less interesting to me.
Here's a new innovation from Isles. The last 100 meters of the run, you run off the treadmill. You jump off. You could do like a lap around the pool to the finish line or something.
Well, what is the innovation they're going to be bringing into this weekend? Nice segue there, Bevan. Yeah. Talking of new innovations, we're moving into Singapore this weekend, which is the grand final. So this is the Triathlon World Championship Series, but it is moving to Singapore. And from what I can tell, and I could be wrong here, haven't done my 100% research, but it certainly looks like the swim is going to be in the open water as opposed to the pool. And then they're going to be doing all that down in Singapore. I know Hayden Wild, I'm pretty sure, is going up for it. The way that this race in Singapore is going to happen is also a little bit different because in the Super League, you have heats and then you have the final. And it seems to me that in these previous couple of races, the top guys, it's not crazy hard to get into the final. They don't have to work too hard. But with this one, if they have a stronger field, it could be quite difficult and quite a game changer in terms of how they've actually laid the format out, because they're going to have heats, and the top 2 athletes in each heat will qualify automatically for the final. Those placed 3rd through 7th will qualify for a repechage. In addition, the 5 fastest losers across the heats will also qualify for the repechage. So what that means is you're going to have some athletes doing a whole extra race to actually qualify for the final, and that could have a potentially big bearing on the outcome. So And that's going to be one interesting part of it. And who is actually going to be crowned the world champion? It's sort of a series, so you kind of have to have done one of these previous events to stand a chance. So the world championships will be decided via a point system, combining the results from the final in Singapore plus each athlete's best results at one of the additional Arena Games events. So the series from Munich and London, where the race winners would get 250 points each. In Singapore, it's going to be 500 points and decreasing 7.5% for each position thereafter. So the likes of Alex Yee and Justice Nischlag on the boys' side, they're in the mix. Beth Potter is obviously in the mix on the female side because she won the first race along with Cassandra Beaugrand, if they're all traveling over to Singapore. It's going to be a big weekend of racing, Bevan, because we've got this at the weekend, we've got the Ironman World Championships, and then next week the short course side of things moves on to the first round of the World Triathlon Series, which is going to be in Yokohama. So I have not seen a start list for Super League yet, but I would hope they're going to have a slightly stronger field because some athletes might use it as a good shakeout before going over to Yokohama.
One thing I would be interested in is how's the business going? From the outside, we love what they're doing. It's great innovation. It seems like a pretty good TV package. At least I'm not sure about the Arena Games, but the other stuff, it's really probably the most exciting watching of triathlon you can see right now. I just would love to know, because remember we had that guy on who did the Uncle Toby's in Australia, and he said, it's really hard to take these things globally. So it'd be really fascinating to. Maybe we should try to get Mecca back on, because he's pretty honest old Mecca. He wouldn't beat around the bush, but I'd love to see, is it a long-term investment that's actually paying off?
Yeah, well, I mean, they haven't even announced the Super League series for this year. So in terms of the actual in real life Super League series, which is going to be in, usually in that sort of September, October sort of period. That last year we saw 3 races sort of back to back. I imagine they'll do something the same, but they haven't actually, as far as I can see, haven't announced what they're going to be doing later on this year. So, yeah, I don't know what their business model is long term, but it's good form of racing. So hopefully we keep it going.
Okay, this week's discussion was, what does your partner hate most about you doing triathlon, and what do you do to try to work around it? Vicky Jones has got, mine hates the fact that I have to stop for health reasons. When I did triathlon, he took care of my plan, mechanics, and logistics. I did the training and racing. We traveled around the world based on the races, and we were both fit and healthy. He thinks, and I agree, that in many ways our lives were better with triathlon.
I don't want any of these happy namby-pamby things in here, Bevan. This is about negativity.
Divorce is happening. I've got to change.
And we have got some of that in there. Peter Colson says she hates how much races cost. How do I work around it? I have a separate bank account for entries and tell my wife I got a free entry. That's good thinking, Pete. That's good thinking, Peter Colson.
One of my good mates, Jeff, he's got his bike account, and I think he sneaks money into that. So he can. Good old Debbie Seitz Weiss has got that I've gone every weekend. Ironman racing training. So he thought he can't beat him, so joined him. So he did his first Ironman at 61. Never even. You don't like Suya. You don't like love.
Happy. We don't want these happy ones.
They've competed for 8 years, John. He went on to place in its last Ironman at age 70.
Okay.
Well done,
David Manley, spending as much as I do on races and doing the minimal amount of training to get there. Yeah, David, pick up your game on the training. If you races these days are insanely expensive, and if my partner wasn't training the house down, if they're putting that much money in, I think I'd be pretty annoyed with you as well, David.
Yeah, that's a fair comment. Good old K Bayless he's a hero, but I'll go on to the next one because you don't like those ones. No. Christopher Doyle's got training on holidays, getting up 3 hours before everyone else to get this shit done, walking around all morning, being a tourist when all you can think about is your 2-hour run that you have to do in the afternoon. Training in holidays can be tough.
Can be. Tommy Morwood says time away from the family for training. Partner can't sleep in, and if I'm out exercising, as she's up with the kids early. To get around, I used to do nearly all my training at night once the kids were asleep. Luckily, I love the treadmill and the indoor trainer.
Jordan White's got, she hates that I get better than she does because she's a triathlete as well. Work around us, making sure she gets the upgrades too. I get better gear than she does. So the workaround is to make sure she gets the upgrades.
Matt Moran.
That would be a problem, because triathlon's expensive. If you've got 2 people in the household doing it, and one wants the new power meter, It's a high conversation.
And if you're of similar ability and you kind of always want to get one up on the other one, and you go buy some gear and then they're going to want that extra gear. Matt Moran says the long weekend effort's leaving me knackered and a bit grumpy, mostly solved by retail, a flash holiday, and lots of washing up.
Good old Marcel Van Kempen's got talking about triathlons. So we don't. So it's a good one.
I'll go Volker, the vascular Viking Voigt. So too much. So to his partner didn't like triathlon very much, so I don't have one anymore.
Okay, it's one option. Andreas Wolf's got that any race kills a whole day. Some of them an entire weekend and leave no time for anything else. Work around, I do very few races and announce them months in advance.
Last one I'll do is Shane Chubb. It says our wedding anniversary falls near or on the weekend of Taupo Ironman every year. So therefore, I only race biannually to make our marriage through another year.
Very good. Good old Mick Simpson's got, this is a positive one, but it's a good one. I used to spend 8 to 12 hours a week at the pub at £3 a pint. Triathlon is much better.
There you go. Nice work,
John,
Mac.
what's yours?
I think I was hoping for a bit more dirt on this here, Bevan. I'm a little bit disappointed with the audience. But in terms of what my partner doesn't necessarily like, a few of them have been highlighted here. Sort of time away in terms of time away training. My workaround with that is I train early in the morning. So, for example, on the Saturday, I've got to do about a 5 to 5.5 hour bike ride, and I'll be heading off at 5:30 in the morning. So then at least at least I'm back on a semi sort of reasonable hour for those long sessions, but that's probably a big one. Another hate is traveling with a bike. Often we have to go to events. So often, say we might go to Kona and have a holiday afterwards. I've still got to lug the bike around. And not only does she hate that, I hate that as well. I hate traveling with a bike. And probably another hate would be trying to package holidays around triathlon, saying, why don't we go to do this? And it just happens to fall around a triathlon.
Oh, there's a race on while I'm there.
What do you know? So those would be three.
Also, when the kids were younger, I imagine it was not doing the longer course stuff.
Yeah, I don't think there's ever a good age with kids, to be honest, until they're probably in their late teens. I think it's a tricky time. You're almost, in some regards, better off when they are really young, because I was still doing some long course racing. I think you can still sort of not get away with it's not the right word. It's more in those ages from probably 8 to 13 to 14, I think, where you've kind of got to be a bit more present, because that's when the activities really start to ramp up. And then if you are out riding your bike all weekend and you're not watching kids sports and stuff like that, I think that's pretty detrimental, not to your relationship alone, but to your whole family sort of setup. So kids do make it tricky. Early morning training is the secret for me.
I would say mine would have been with my ex-partners, because Joe I remember I wrote my last Ironman. I just started seeing Joe, and I remember saying to her, I'm glad you get to see what this life is like, but it's not going to be good for a relationship, so I'm glad I'm moving on from it. I would say my ex-partners would say they get the least tired version of me, or the most tired version of me all the time, and that partly because my job's also a lot of energy out for other people. And so, they kind of got the worst of me, and not that I was a really bad person when I was tired, but it was, the best energy of me went to my training and my classes. And when it come to being a partner, maybe I wasn't the greatest partner because I didn't have the greatest energy. So that's probably a fair comment. That was probably one of the issues. This week's discussion is name the three athletes who will place 5th through to 10th in this weekend's. So we're not trying to do your top threes.
Oh, no, everyone's going to be doing that. Everyone's just going to, and then we're going to get the same stuff. Everyone's going to say the Norwegians, and the top 3 females is maybe a bit predictable. I want to know who's coming, sort of some athletes who are going to come 5th through 10th.
Okay, so you've got to name 3 athletes that sit within that 5th through to 10th at the Ironman World Championships at St. George this weekend. Okay, we've got a quiz.
We have, and I don't know the answer. Well, I think I know the answer to this, but who was the World Triathlon Series champion before COVID struck? So I'm thinking 2019, because the last couple of years we've had a few races here or there, and you've had people being called world champions from doing, one or two races. So 2019 season was the last full season. Who was the short course, so the World Triathlon Series champion?
I do have a couple guesses on this one, but we'll talk about this later on. Later on in the show, we've got an interview coming up. Mark Elliott, he has been an elite athlete himself in his day. He's been one of New Zealand's most influential high-performance program people with triathlon and cycling, and he's just achieved a lot in his time. So we thought we'd get him on to have a chat about all things high performance. Here is Mark Elliott right now.
Righty-ho team, as you heard earlier in the show, we've got a fella by the name of Mark Elliott on today, and for Kiwis, you may well have heard of him. For you overseas listeners, you may not have. He was a former physio back in the day and then moved on to getting involved in triathlon. He was also got second in the Coast to Coast 1 year behind Steve Gurney. He was a coach to Bevan Doherty, who's a two-time Olympic medalist, also sort of led the Triathlon New Zealand program and Cycling New Zealand program, and is still in the game. And the reason which prompted this interview is I bumped into him at a race a couple of weeks ago. So he's still doing some tri coaching with elite athletes. So welcome along to the show, Mark.
Yeah, cheers, John. Thanks for the intro. Good to be here and great to catch up and connect again after so many years of running and sweating alongside you.
Yeah, so I mean, I've given a 2-second intro to you, but maybe just tell us a bit about your sort of, I don't know, life a little bit before triathlon and prior to probably about 1996. What was life looking like?
Oh, well, life was pretty standard as a Kiwi boy, playing a bit of rugby and really just found the sport of triathlon because a rugby teammate said that you're just not fit enough for the game of rugby, and I said, okay, well, why don't we do a triathlon? And ended up doing that, and then just got captured by the sport, and here we are 30 years later, still loving the sport and still passionate about it. And I guess it sort of transitioned from having a go at your first triathlon through to as you did back in those days, wanting to go to the pinnacle event, which was Ironman, having a go at that, and then getting injured too many times trying to do Ironman as you do in the early days, and decided seeing the physio quite a bit, that seems like a good gig. So ended up going to university and doing a physio degree. So, and that pretty much was the start of the high performance journey. Going from working alongside the likes of Dr. John Hallemans and taking teams overseas, and back in the early 2000s, late 1990s, New Zealand didn't have a lot of money in the high performance sector. So the only way athletes could be supported overseas was to have a physio beside them, and that physio, who was me, was pretty much the eyes and ears for the coaches back in New Zealand. And that's developed the passion for helping athletes not only be injury free but to perform to the best of their abilities in those critical phases in the last 6 weeks up into an event and right through to competition. So that's where it started, John, and it's quite a detailed story after that even.
Yeah, so 1996, I think, was probably your first sort of foray into things, because that was the year we went away to Flagstaff, Arizona, and had an altitude camp over there, and then went off to the 96 World Champs, which was in Cleveland, Ohio. And we actually had Jamie Hunt on the show a few weeks ago, who was also on that camp. So so 96, I know things sort of started from there, but I think you're probably more into the 2000s where you kind of got heavily involved in it. What was the process sort of, and how did things happen, not just for you, but for the sport from 96 sort of through to the early 2000s in terms of trying to develop a bit of a high performance program with, leading into the Olympics in 2000 and 2004?
Yeah, so the sport obviously went through significant change. It got the great opportunity to be an Olympic discipline in the late 1990s, and Sydney Olympics was that first opportunity, and I mean that just hyped the sport up to another level. At that stage, athletes like Bevan, Hamish Carter, Craig Watson, etc., who are just the Kiwi icons of the sport, were just starting the journey of what it was like to be a professional athlete in the European phase. Back then, there was, a strength in the sport in America and Europe, but most of our athletes tended to migrate over to Europe, the French Grand Prix and that sort of racing. And I guess those athletes were doing it all on their own. And it sort of became clear that, they knew themselves that they had to operate collectively to get the best out of themselves in training. It is swim, bike, run every day, as you guys all know. And it's, it's when you're doing it with a bunch of mates or a bunch of people that can push you, just becomes much more of an enjoyable journey. And I guess they recognise that for the Sydney Olympics, which was the first Olympic campaign I was involved in. My wife and I really looked after Hamish, Bevan, Evan Williamson, Craig Watson. Even though Bevan didn't make the Olympics, who's sort of their training as a training partner, we sort of got together for an altitude camp and prepared essentially for the Olympics, just with those athletes putting a plan together themselves with their coaches. And from that, obviously, we didn't have a successful Olympics, even though I think Hamish was ranked number 1 in the world. And there was a lot of reasons for that. And I think that's where I sort of felt that, wow, there's a whole lot of better things we could be doing for the athletes and the coaches to grow and develop what it takes to succeed on the world stage. And from there, developed into taking on the role as the performance director for Triathlon New Zealand in the early 2000s and about 2002, 2001, and developed from there really, and through to the first little successful milestone, which was that double gold, silver in Athens.
So what did you change between, we've had Hamish Carter on the show before, but what did you sort of try to change between the Sydney Olympics, where for New Zealand things didn't go well, and a lot of other nations would have had similar stories? There's only 3 medals that can be handed out. What did you specifically try to change between 2000 and 2004 when we had completely contrasting performances?
A couple of things. Probably the first thing is recognizing that the strength of the team or the performance comes from a team approach. And I mean, and that's you look at some of those attributes that Olympic gold medalists have. It's they always have a tight team of people around them, and that's there might be only 3 or 4 key people. And in triathlon in those days, the athlete essentially had a coach, might have had a strength conditioner, may have had someone who was doing a bit of nutritional work, but essentially the tight team was the coach. So essentially what I did is work out how I could bring that tight team of coaches and the athletes collectively together to not only develop themselves and learn from each other, but also just to ensure that the athletes were developing the skill sets required for the sport, which was fastly changing at that stage from a very Ironman based approach through to that Olympic distance, which now even seems quite long distance when you look at some of the short Super League stuff going on. But back then, Olympic distance was the sprint event for athletes who were predominantly in that Ironman space, and in America, a lot of the racing was certainly over 2 hours. So getting into that racing where it was under 2 hours was regarded as a sprint. So it was about just the learnings that were required. Starting to bring in a bit of technology. We were, I don't know if you've ever had Brendan Downing on the show, but another great Kiwi icon. He was a sports scientist. We were starting to play around with GPS back in those days when GPSs were about the size of a cigarette packet. So you had to work out how to strap the GPS to the athlete. It was easy enough to strap it to a bike, but it was never quite comfortable strapping them to the back of an athlete's shoulder blade. So a whole lot of things like that, John. But essentially, it was about bringing people together, learning from each other, and recognizing that there was strength from us to accelerate our learning by getting together and challenging our thinking around how we can make our athletes faster.
Obviously, it was a real big learning factor for you at that stage. What were you kind of, how did you handle that? Because I imagine it was a bit overwhelming, because it seems like you're such the infancy of this high performance. How was the management of that within your own journey of when you had your failures and when you had your successes?
Good question, Bevan. I mean, I think the key fundamental came back. I think one, I was a physiotherapist, and when you're a physio, it's about those one-on-one interactions and looking what's someone comes into your room with an injury, all they want to do is get back to training. And I was absolutely passionate about working out not only getting them back to training, but actually getting them back better than what they were. And it's taking those same philosophies really with dealing with coaches. They all have their same ideals and values and principles, and it's actually working out those factors, of what's going to get the best for them in the future. So, my journey was pretty much similar to my physio journey, was just working out what was best for others and then working out what was best for others to collectively put together. And, it sounds easy to say that, and it's not easy. But once you get a bit of momentum and you get, 3 or 4 coaches buying into that, it's pretty hard for other 3 or 4 coaches to not buy into it. And if they don't, well, there's probably something to be learned from them if they're doing something else. And I think it's, sometimes you learn as much from your failures. And, Triathlon New Zealand had a failure in Sydney, massive failure from, the expectations that Sydney, Hamish would go and win gold. And, they didn't. So it was about the learning, pulling that apart. And I think that's one of the other factors, is that the learning came through from being really analytical about, what success could look like, and then what you did along the way. What would you keep, stop, and start doing? I think those simple factors, if you kept applying those models, you were bound to keep learning, and that's what high performance sport is about. It's about how you can accelerate your learning over the rest of the world.
Yeah.
I had a random one, because I often watch. I don't watch football very much, but I struggle to wonder how managers of like big Premier League teams manage all those egos and stroppiness that must come with those guys in those situations. And I'm certainly not necessarily comparing triathlon to football in terms of the stroppy type of athletes, but how you're dealing with adults,
isn't you?
Yeah, but you're dealing with adults. It's one thing, dealing with, say, a junior development program and dealing with that age of athletes. But when you're dealing with high performing athletes and the adults, how do you kind of deal with the stroppiness that must come and go? If someone's missed a particular selection, but they're kind of still in the program, how did you personally deal with that?
Oh, well, interesting, John. I'm fascinated by football for a number of reasons, and fascinated by the likes of just watching someone like Jürgen Klopp. How does he manage the tension that must sit within the team? But I think the key thing is any athlete, what do they want? What's their one driver? And it's not. It's generally not what a lot of people would think. It's they want to win a gold medal, or they want to win the European Champions League. What they want to do is they want to perform to their best and actually put their best performance out there. And you talk to any gold medalist, it's not about the gold medal, it's actually about the execution of it. And I think if you can find that sweet spot as a manager or director or a coach or a leader, which connects to that athlete around what it takes to get optimal performance, then I think you can bring that collectively. Yes, it must be much more challenging when your team and people are on $1 million salaries, but they're on $1 million salaries for one thing, because they really want to optimize performance. And in football, they know they need to do it as a team. They can't do it individually. They have to do it collectively. And that's the interesting journey that triathlon's gone through, as it went from being one where we recognized for New Zealand back in the day, because of our limited numbers, we had to get a strength from a team, individuals within that team. That then evolved into very individual focused, and now we've got to this mixed team relay component. It's coming back to this combination of both individual outcomes, but then collectively delivering as a team. And the team's only as strong as the weakest link. So I think that's the crux of that question comes back down to, you've got to find that motivation and drive, and what really is that athlete looking for to optimize their performance potential.
A lot of people hear about high performance programs in the public, and they don't really know what's happening. So what is the difference between what the public maybe perceives as a high performance program to what is actually happening within the program?
Well, the high performance program is a business. It's essentially you're creating a structure for people to, like any business, your businesses, you're developing widget A, B, and C, and in high performance, it's I don't believe it's just a combination of developing gold medal A, B, and C. It's actually about developing people. So if you take that concept of you're developing a program to or a high performance business to grow people and to grow their true potential, then that sits across the whole ethos of the business. And it sits around performance for an athlete, it sits around growth and knowledge development for the coach, and it sits about opportunities to contribute to that performance outcome for the staff. So I think the business is, I think it's a people business. It is about making sure that you're getting the best potential out of the people. The other side to it, though, it's always a business that operates under financial constraints. New Zealand, doesn't have a lot of money to play with in the high performance stake. So you might be running a business with a budget of $5 million a year. The UK will be running the same sport with a budget of close to 30 to 60 million New Zealand dollars a year. I mean, that was the case in the cycling program. I think we were running at 5 million per year. The UK was running, I think, around about 45 million New Zealand dollars. So you're working out how to balance opportunity cost, because you can't do everything. You've got to be really targeted about what you do. So it's a combination of developing people, balancing finance and opportunity cost, and then making sure you've got a long-term strategy around where you want to go. And I think that was one of the big learnings I took between Beijing 2008 probably through to 2014, was being really clear about what the sport found was important. It wasn't what I found was important or knew was important. It was actually about what the sport was needed to have in place for its long-term success. And the great thing of cycling's had a pretty bad rap in New Zealand over the last few years, but there's some incredibly good people in there, and they're doing some incredibly good work. And the thing I'm most proud of is the fact that they're doing still a really great job with developing young athletes, and you're seeing that with the likes of Elise Andrews, who won, and Campbell Stewart, who won medals in Tokyo this year. They started in the junior program back in 2012. So that's what the high performance program is about. Is about developing those people over time.
What's it like for the athletes in there? Obviously triathlon, and you've got experience in cycling as well. The money for the athletes is not huge in terms of, especially on a New Zealand level. If you become a pro tour rider in Europe, and if you become a top triathlete, then the money's okay. But I guess financially, and also just living in that high performance environment, again, maybe what are some of the pressures that maybe the general public probably don't quite understand?
Yeah, I think the sport again has changed. Certainly, you just can't do anything on the bones of your butt these days, because it costs thousands of dollars to fly around the world. Back in the day of early 2000s, 1990s triathlon, is that there was limited racing, and it was all within one block. We used to be able to go to Europe for an 8-week block, 6 weeks of altitude and sea level, and do 3 or 4 key races that would guarantee the points for world championship selection and nomination and all those bits, and away you went. It was relatively simplistic, and you could do it within, as mentioned, probably about an 8-week block, say, and you do a whole lot of other blocks within the year, but they were generally quite structured. Whereas nowadays, they start racing in February in triathlon and don't finish until December. And athletes are constantly aware of needing to be gathering points. They're having to go to races. They're having to go to races to fulfill sponsor obligations. They're having to go to races to fulfill contract obligations. So there's a lot more stress and pressure on them to deliver in that space. So I think that's the big change, John, is I think we're seeing it's a professional athlete now all year round, and they have to be very selective about when they take their downtime. They have to be very selective in their non-Olympic years around, optimizing performance over the course of the year to guarantee, qualification points. And then they have to be very selective in an Olympic year to pinnacle peak performance when it matters. So, I think they're the subtle things. The challenge around money is constant, and triathlon, up until we sort of got locked into COVID, was, there was good opportunity there for solid athletes to make an income, and cycling was the same, and it was always the balance. Trying to, with pro cyclists, it was pretty easy in the early days with the young athletes because they were never going to get pro contracts in the pro tour. So we pretty much had them captured within the high performance program because they knew that was a pathway to get them there. And you see some of the athletes now, like Paddy Bevan, who's just won a couple of tours in Europe, the Tour of Turkey. I think he's just won a stage in Tour of Romandy. I mean, Paddy was in the high performance program for cycling back in 2011, 2012. Just missed out on being, in the squad for 2014 for Glasgow for the men's pursuit. but that's where he did his, he managed to, keep ticking over as a cyclist without having a Pro Tour contract in those, early formative years when he needed that support. And then he's now, standing up on his own 2 feet, and it's just so good to see those guys who, as a young athlete, have been supported by a national program, come in and out a little bit, and then they've gone on and taken their own kick, and now fully self-sustaining, which is great. So it's about that balance of both money and professional timing for athletes, really.
How is triathlon different to cycling? Yeah, and obviously in your role was different because cycling was a much bigger participation sport and a bigger sport as a organization. But how is it different to triathlon?
Firstly, the cycling program in New Zealand is based around 4 sports of BMX, mountain bike, road and track, all collectively together under one high performance arm. So, you're dealing with 4 different sports that operate from about 11 seconds to 5.5 hours. So that's, I guess in a way that's not much different to triathlon. You've got, super sprint right through to Olympic distance, half Ironman. Not that there's really a high performance focus on Ironman in New Zealand. The biggest difference, I think, Bevan, is the fact that with cycling it's a massive program. We were running over 50 campaigns around the world every year. Team of about 30 staff and 40 contracted support staff that would come in. You have got a very strong connection with a lot of the athletes who are developing because they're in a centrally based environment, but then you've got a whole lot of athletes who are around the ether that are semi-pro or pro that you're having to work across. So that's challenging, and you don't see that in triathlon. You don't see pro teams, like you have clusters of athletes being coached in groups, but you don't have pro teams that are dictating the terms of the athlete. And got a great story of us doing a whole lot of work with the world champion time trialist Linda Willemsen back in 2015. We did a whole lot of wind tunnel work, and we worked out exactly what bike she needed to be on to be the fastest she could be, because she was an incredibly flexible young lady and was able to get very aero. So we found the right bike, did the wind tunnel testing, compared that to a pro team, and we worked out that a bike could save her 15 seconds if we put her on a different brand of bike. Wow. Now, you've got to then balance that with the pro team, who have no interest whatsoever on her riding any bike but their own. And in the end, she ended up riding the bike. We had quite a little drama with her pro team at that stage, but she rode the bike, won the world champs by 8 seconds. So, so you've got to balance those. Now, in triathlon, you don't have that. If an athlete gets a sponsorship from Trek or Specialized or Giant, they're not going to go, no, actually I don't want to be riding a Specialized, I want to be riding a Giant because of. It doesn't happen in that space. They'll just grab whatever equipment they can get. So there's quite a difference, I think, in the between triathlon and cycling as well in the technology space. Cycling is so technology focused. The work we were doing in the track in particular, we could be tracking athletes' movement patterns to 1/1000th of a second. Triathlon is still taking a journey with power and both power development and the analytics, because there's so many uncontrollables in a drafting style event. So I think there's a whole lot of technology and controllable factors that sort of operate in the cycling space, and possibly a little bit more fluidity that sits in triathlon. So there's that side of it.
Can I ask just a random question, Mark? Yeah. Do you kind of know the kids who are going to be stars, or you have no idea?
Look, I think early on when you have training camps with juniors, you see the kids who have got great values and principles within a team, that come through and shine through early. Doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be stars, but it certainly means they're going to be leaders within the team of their peers, and I think that's a key phase. A lot of the, so I think you probably can. I think you see some of the attributes, like I recall seeing Campbell Stewart, who won a medal in the Omnium at Tokyo. I remember seeing him as a junior. He was a standout young man way back in 2012. He was a born leader. He was very dedicated. He was very professional. Same with some of the sprint athletes, Ethan Mitchell, just incredibly professional at what they do right from the word go. So just have the right principles behind. Now, it doesn't mean to say that will always convert into being a champion, but they're developing the concepts that's required to be a high performance athlete, and that's consistency, that's professionalism, that's respect for working with others, and it's actually that open mind of constantly learning. And I think if you can spot those, we did a lot of work with the cycling program early on, and particularly around just developing team values and working for each other. And I think the kids who get that seem to be the ones that do follow through over time, because they recognize the journey is about doing it with others. It's not about doing it in isolation. And I think if you can see those concepts and they train hard and they just never give up, never say die approach, then it's generally a pretty good way to transfer them through to high performance success in the future.
Now, you mentioned a couple of times about the New Zealand situation, lack of funding compared to others. Say in triathlon space, you're up against, I guess, the UK and the US in particular. Do you know much about their programs and how they compare to New Zealand, other than their bankroll being a hell of a lot bigger than ours?
Not the detail, and I don't think you really have the time to focus too much on what other countries and teams are doing. You might be looking at the way they're racing. You certainly would be looking at some of the, for instance, our sports scientists, strength conditioners might be through their networks looking at some of the work they may be doing around either certain training stimulus, whether it's eccentric training loads or whatever it may be. So that there might be some individual views of what those programs are doing. But as far as when it comes down to performance, you want to dedicate your focus to the athletes in front of you. And in sport of, certainly if you look at cycling and the likes of the team sports like team pursuit, team sprint, you're really focused on the athletes you've got and how you can optimize their potential within the strengths they've got. And you obviously need to be aware of where world leading is, and you obviously need to be setting your targets above that, because it's always going to move. So my role, for instance, where we did spend a lot of time understanding what other programs were doing, was when we built the velodrome here in Cambridge. And that was in the early 2012, 2013, or even 2011, spent time in England understanding how the journey they'd taken with centralising their high performance cycling program. So that's where you're learning. So you can go back and talk to the people who have been in that environment, what worked, what didn't, what would they do if they had the opportunity again. So you start, I guess you're accelerating where the pitfalls might be to pass over those speed bumps and move on. So plenty of learnings from those opportunities, John, as diving into understanding the sports. But when it comes to performance, I think the focus really needs to be on your own game, but just knowing that you've got an eye on what the rest of the world would be doing. And the good thing is you've got plenty of World Cups and test events where you can test it out to see where you are.
It's pretty staggering when we compare the athletes these days to the mid 90s. I remember Jamie Hunt a couple of weeks ago saying, he was in really good shape, and I think he mentioned like he went and ran a 14:30 5K, which you go, yeah, that's pretty fast. But then you're seeing Hayden Wild going and running 13:30 or something like that. So it's pretty staggering how much the sport has really changed over the last probably 15 to 20 years. Is it for you just got a hell of a lot faster and a hell of a lot deeper? I mean, what are some of the key things you've seen evolve since, say, the Bevan Doherty era and Hamish Carter era to what we're actually seeing out there now?
Yeah, I mean, yes, it has changed, but possibly not as much as I thought it might have. I mean, Hayden's quite a special athlete. He's come from an incredibly good base as a multi-sporter, but he obviously has got incredibly good ability to tolerate lactate, incredibly good ability to tolerate multiple pace change, and on top of that, got great leg speed. And the other thing that helps him is he's just a whippet, weighs nothing, so therefore his power to weight and his efficiency is very, very high. So he's a completely different athlete to even the likes of Bevan and Hamish, who I think they might have run nationals one year and run about 14 1450 and a bunch of 2 or 3 people, if there'd been a couple of guys running sort of 1350, I have no doubt they probably could have run faster. Just they weren't trained for that. You remember back then, as Jamie was, he was probably training for Olympic distance. And so therefore the requirements for him to actually have to run 14 or to run 240 Ks back then, 10K off the bike, if you could run 31, you were winning any event in the world. So we reset the bar with Bevan in 2004 by trying to run 3-minute Ks off the bike for the first 3K. And so in this day and age, they're probably doing a 240, a 250, and then settling into a 3, and then they're going again. So, but they might only be going for 5K, so they might just be doing 240, 240, 245, 250, 230 to finish. So, it's changed. The sport's changed from a distance perspective. They're running a bit faster, no doubt. Are they biking any faster? Depends on the race, and the swimming. I think there's probably some subtle changes in the kick off the line to the first buoy. They certainly would be going way quicker in that first 200 now than what they did, back in the day. So, it's changed, but it hasn't changed that much over 20 years, I don't think. And I think if you found a couple of those athletes like Jamie in particular, because he was such a strong, fast, young athlete, I think if he was racing in that sort of super sprint distance, I think he'd probably surprise himself if he trained for it, how quick he could be. Just wasn't doing specifically. He would have been out doing big long rides, big long runs, big long bricks, as opposed to some of that short, sharp, intensive stuff.
Just on a personal level, you've been an athlete a long time. How do you stay motivated, and what's your training about now for you? As you age, how does it change, and what's your focus?
You're an old fart.
I'm not saying you're an old fart, but you've been an athlete for a very long time.
No, I'm not. I haven't called myself an athlete for about 20 years, Bevan. Okay. So look, I just love keeping fit. I'll ride my bike every day if I can. And the only time I won't is if I've got to, go to the office in Auckland or something. I'm just passionate about, being out and about and keeping fit and healthy. I still coach young kids. I run a coaching group here in Cambridge for the last 7 years. I've been running a group of kids from 12 to 16. I used to coach, which John and you would have been a part of down in Christchurch, out at QE2, where we have up to 100 people turning up for Monday night, Tuesday night running sessions. I've transferred that down to when I lived in Wanaka for 10 years, did a group down there, so that keeps me fit, trying to keep up with the real athletes. And then up here I've gone and started working with younger kids because they're easy to keep up with when they're only 12 years of age. No longer an athlete, just enjoy being fit, just love riding my bike. Invested in a gravel bike last year, just can't get enough of riding it. I'll never ride anything else. It's just so much fun. So enjoying it and enjoying seeing helping others achieve their potential and learn on the journey.
Awesome, Mark. Love your work. I don't suppose you do any social media or anything like that if people want to follow you. No. You're old school. I picked that. Awesome. No, thanks for your time, Mark.
Don't have time, John, for social media.
Awesome, Mark. Love your work, and thanks so much for your time. And we'll see you at another race sometime soon.
Jumbo, your thoughts?
Mark's a good man. I've known him for a long time, and really shaking things up in New Zealand, and calls a spade, and
professional as well, isn't he?
Yeah, no, he did some great things for. I think that's the right word, Bevan. Professional. He kind of brought triathlon from in New Zealand, at least, from being, everyone sort of doing their own thing and helping out where you can, to actually making it a hell of a lot more professional. So good on that man, and it's great to see he's still involved in the sport.
It is nice when you hear, it's like, I remember we did the interview with Messick, not the one you did a couple of weeks ago, but the one we did a while ago. And, when you hear the higher level people of how they perceive something and how they look at something, a lot of our sideline kind of fans can be quite critical of these types of organizations, but we don't really get the depth and understanding of what they have to do. And, it's nice to talk to someone like Mark and actually think of the bigger picture of what they are trying to achieve in these environments. So it was really good to get him on the show. Okay, let's go to this week's Wanger of the Week.
And I put it into random.org this week, Bevan. The first person hadn't done any swimming or running, so they were out. The next person was yesterday, they were number 95. They've actually dropped 4 places in the last day.
99.
99. So number 99 was Barbara Nelson. What do we call Barbara? I think it's the Rocket, I think it is. But she's been on the show before, and I think she was actually talking from memory. It was around menopause, something like that, many years ago. Barbara came on one of our camps. It was to Hawaii a few years ago. So last week she did 12 hours and 54 minutes. So that's what you got to do to crack into the top 100. 12 hours and 54 minutes from 11 sessions. She did 2 hours and 30 minutes of swimming, 5 hours and 36 minutes of cycling, and 4 hours and 47 minutes of running. Barbara is from Idaho Falls, funnily enough, in Idaho. And she's done races all over the world and done fantastically well over the last little period. Let's just have a look here. Running wise, she's done 44 runs so far this year. How many swims has she done? She's done 26 swims. Barbara, I am taking you down. I've done 41 swims so far this year. And her longest ride has been 181.5 kilometers, and the biggest climb only 869 meters. Barbara, we need to take you across to Europe and get you riding in some of the mountains. She did Ironman Cozumel back in November of 2018, which was her longest ride, 181.55 kilometers. And that still staggers me that Cozumel is where we had Christian Blumenfeld go and do that amazingly fast time on debut. Right. And the course is 1.55 kilometers long. So very impressive. So Barbara,
too long.
Go long. Barbara, awesome work.
Number one thing I do have to say, if you look at her photos, they've got a pretty cool hydro slide at her pool. You know, if you look at the photos, she's got some photos of herself. She's finishing 170.3, got the cool glasses on at the swimming pool. She's done the spring tour in St. George, Utah, but then she's also got a local swimming pool. It's got the hydro slide. So maybe you do a lap, you run up, you could come down the hydro slide, you do another lap. That'd be a good set, wouldn't it? You've got to sprint up the steps, come down the hydro slide, and then swim a lap.
Oh, we used to do that all the time. Back in the good old days in Q2, it was an absolute gut buster because that was a really high.
So would you do that? This is the old hydro slide, the really old one.
Yeah. No, and then we'd occasionally do that. This was swim training days. They'd turn the hydro slide on, and we'd just do a few reps up there, and then Super League style, you could run up, come down the hydro slide, get your breath back, and then you'd be diving back into the water, and you'd feel like absolute rubbish. Great session though.
Oh, that's such a cool idea, mate. We're thinking on the same page.
Yeah. Love it. Triathlon coach.
I tell you. So Barbara, you need to go to I'm sure your crew do this anyway, but say the IMTalk crew says we have to do 100 reps. Hydro slide, 1 lap, 100 reps. That's the challenge. Okay, Barbara Nelson, you are our wanger of the week. Okay, so the question is, John's quiz question was, who was the World Triathlon Championship Series, both female and male, in 2019? Now, I'm going to say 2019. Was it Brownlee? Was it Jonathan Brownlee? Because was it the year when Alistair pulled him across the line?
No, you're dreaming, mate. It was years before that. Now I'm going to go for Vincent Louis, and because I'm thinking 2020 was COVID and 2021 was sort of COVID, wasn't it? Not a little less so. So I think 2019 the World Championships were in Lausanne, I think, and Christian Blumenfeld won his first ever race at the grand finale and absolutely smoked it. But I think probably Vincent Louis took out the series on the boys' side, and on the female side, I'm going to go for, I'm not quite sure so much on the female side. I don't think it was Flora Duffy because I think she was having injury challenges. So I'm going to go for Georgia Taylor Brown.
Okay, well, wait a second. The year that when he did push him across the line, that was to win the championship series, wasn't it?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd be guessing that was probably 2017, something like that, maybe 2016 even. Okay. Let's have a look here. 2019.
Jonathan Brownlee.
I was wrong. Katie Zaveris took it out. by the looks of this. This is Wikipedia. I haven't gone to Triathlon. So Katie Zaveris was first, Jess Lemont second, Georgia Taylor-Brown third. On the boys' side, I was right. Vincent Louis was first, Mario Mola second, and Javier Gomez in third place. The last time Brownlee finished second in 2016. So that was probably the year when.
So has Jonathan Brownlee ever actually won the whole series?
He has in 2012. Yep.
But that wasn't that year, was it?
No, he got second 2011, second 2011, first 2012, second 2013, third 2014, second 2016, and hasn't done anything since then. Great athlete, just he got Olympic medals, so you can't go best athlete
and he's got the whole set.
And he's got some world titles. He did win races, but he didn't win he just wasn't that dominating figure like a Mola or a sort of a Gomez necessarily was. So still awesome.
I know he's moved on 70.3s, and he hasn't necessarily performed at the level that maybe you'd hope or think. Do you think we're going to see it, or do you think maybe not?
Nah. Not happening.
Why?
I don't know. You usually see short course athletes come across and often have instantaneous success or instantaneous averageness. So I don't. I see him being reasonable, but I don't see him being a world beater when you've seen other athletes that have come across and boom, they are straight out of the gates and straight onto it. So someone like a Bevan Doherty, his first 70.3s, he was just absolutely spanking it, and we've seen quite a few others that have done sort of similar things. Alistair Brownlee, his first 70.3, boom, he was out the gate. Look at some of the current ones where you say that Martin Van Riel, Christian Blumenfeld, Gustav Eden, all those guys had pretty much instantaneous success and really crushing it, whereas Brownlee's done several now, and he hasn't. It's not that he's been in the top three or anything. He hasn't even been in the top three. He's been well out of it. So no, I think I can't see it happening. Love to see it because he's a great athlete.
So another question I have for you is, of the batch of athletes who went through Tokyo this year, who are kind of at the end of their career in short course, who's come through already and how they're doing?
Haven't really seen. Are you talking in terms of how they're doing in short course racing?
Well, no, the ones who are kind of at the end of their short course career, who we would like the Brownlee, like Jonathan Brownlee, who have kind of given up their time in the short course, probably got a few more years in longer course 70.3s and Ironman. There's always that post-Olympic phase where we're going to see that next generation or that short course guy go to longer. Jonathan Brownlee.
It's only May, so I think we have to save that judgment till later in the season, because we've seen a few of them do races, but they're still racing short course. So we've seen Martin Van Riel absolutely crush it at a 70.3, but he's still very much focused on short course stuff. So, and we've seen Vincent Louis, he was going to be doing one, but he pulled out for some reason. So he's probably the other one that'll be really interesting to see if he does try to do some half distance races as well as. How would you pick him? Haven't seen yet, so I think he's only done one, and he didn't sort of blow everybody away. So I think he's pretty strong around, and I think he'll do well.
Okay, sweet. Okay, John, swim set.
Yeah, well, I haven't been swimming for the last 2 weeks thanks to bloody COVID. So I was sort of resigned to doing some swim cord work. So this is a swim cord routine that I would do. So I generally only do sort of 15, maybe maximum 20 minutes of swim cords when I do that. And last week when I couldn't get to the pool, I think I did probably three sessions. What I do is I set up an app, and I have it going 50 seconds on, 10 seconds recovery, and I'll set that for usually 18 minutes to run, and I'll pick out some exercises. I'll pick out 6 exercises, and I'll do them in pairs. So what I did yesterday, I think it was 3 times 6 minutes, and I had the first set I did was single arms. So just having one arm recovering out the front, pull the other arm through. I'd do 1 minute on that, and then I'll do a wide clap, which is when you're facing away from the wall and you're kind of just clapping your hands together. And I'd repeat that through 3 times. And then set number 2 would be double arms, so a little bit more sort of butterfly style. And then I'll do a rotator cuff exercise where you're facing away from the wall. You have your arms up kind of in a crucifix position, then you put your hands pointing to the ceiling and you're just rotating them forward. Do that exercise 3 times through, and then the last last round would be doing freestyle arms. So you're actually doing the pull through and the recovery phase, and breaststroke arms. And again, do that 3 times through. Key thing when you're doing swim cord routines is you need to get the cords mounted nice and high, so at least above your head. And then when you bend over, the main thing is you need to have a flat back. You need to be looking down and having a flat back. So if you've got anybody at home, whether it be a child or a partner or anything, just get them to take a little bit of footage of you side on, and you need to be bending over. You need to poke your bum back a bit like you're going down into a sort of a squat, and you need to have a nice flat back. Otherwise, arch back, you're just not going to be doing it correctly. So that's my swim set for yesterday. Going back to the pool today, Bevan, it's always ugly when you've been out of the pool for nearly 2 weeks. Back in the pool today.
Dangerous times ahead. Okay, let's say thank you to our patrons. We've got Ed, the Unbreakable Smith.
We have Sonia, the glue brace girdle, along with her husband, Walt.
We've also got Scott, the Minister Morrison. If you want to become a patron of the show, go to www.imtalk.me, go through to support us, go through the process, you support the boys, you get a gift, you go and draw to win some cool prizes. If you want some coaching, go to coachjohnnewson.com. You can also check out epiccamp.com. He's got some camps coming up, including one in New Zealand and going back to Rolt next year. My podcast, Bevan James Isle Show, I did a show yesterday, which I've been getting some good feedback on, so you can check that out. Also, other content, you can email us at imtalkpodcast@gmail.com. Jumbo, your goss.
Well, we didn't get to go to Kaiteri, Bevan, on last
week's show. Where did you not actually go?
People would have heard, oh, yeah, I was lying on the beach, blah, blah, blah. We tested positive the day before we were due to go, so we had to stay at home, had a staycation.
Oh, bugger. And you couldn't even leave the house?
Not really, no. So
not really
sucked. Well, no, we didn't. So it was a no. We didn't leave the house. So that was a real bugger, and just hung out at home. And
what did you do with yourself?
Did a bit of gardening. Guy went pretty hardcore on the garden, because the version of COVID I had, and I totally understand there's a lot of people out there that are getting completely smoked. There's some people that get a sore throat, and that's about it. I was probably towards the lesser end. I had a sore throat on day one, and then got a bit snotty, just sort of a regular sort of flu. Never got really bad, a little bit of a cough, but nothing too bad, and certainly coming out the other side reasonably comfortably. Key indicators for me is sort of keeping an eye on heart rate, and my heart rate's certainly under control. Don't have that fatigue a lot of people sort of experience post-COVID, where you're rooted for a while. And if you're in those circumstances, guys, you've got to just shut it down and just take it easy, and unfortunately just take it on the chin. So I'm really grateful that I've had a pretty mild version. So yeah, we hit the garden pretty hard, hung out with the kids. Bevan, I tell you what, Lego, Bevan, a big focus last week was Thomas decided to sell his Lego.
Oh, no.
He has got a ginormous set of Lego.
So what, it's just, it doesn't use it anymore? He's older, it's not really a thing
anymore?
Yeah,
just kind of want to get rid of it, and got other things he wants to buy. So he said, why don't you put it up there? He had a lot of Star Wars Lego. And what they do with Lego is they bring it out, and it's always a limited edition. And then once it's gone, they don't re-release that set. That set. So it's a good, I did not realize the value of it before we started this project. And by the time we're done, we've got a couple more days, a few more things up on Trade Meet. It was a big project getting it all up there, and now we've got to package it off and send it up. He's going to make like $2,000.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there was a bidding wars that went mental. There was like a piece that was a set that was about $25 retail, went for $101. And other ones, he got face value for a lot of the sets, and for a number of sets he got a little bit more than face value, and sometimes a lot more. And even on other sets, he still would have got more than 50% of resale. So it was mind blowing.
What wow, I was expecting to say a couple $100. What's he going to do for 2,000?
Oh, he's run to he wants to do lots of hiking. So he's done all the research into a lightweight tent and a lightweight sleeping bag and all this sort of stuff. So yeah, it's amazing. So parents, I think it's the Star Wars that is the crux. Like we've got some other stuff listed that sort of, you maybe get a few bucks here and there for it, but the Star Wars stuff has just gone nuts.
Wow, it's out of it.
Well,
I've got two funny stories for you. So one is, have you got a TAB account?
Yes.
So Joe on the weekend
TAB for overseas listeners is like betting, and you can bet on the horses and so sports betting in New Zealand.
I've got an account. I put $50 in it about 2 years ago, and I'm up to 140, so I'm doing all right. And I do small bets very, very rarely. But Joe, they were doing $50. You put $10 into account, they give you a free $50 account.
No, I've played that game. Yep.
So Joe thought on the week she'll do it, and she put it in and she put 2 bets on. She put Canterbury to win the rugby and the Warriors to lose the league.
Oh.
The Warriors won. And for those people overseas, Canterbury never lose. Like we're arguably one of the greatest sports teams in the world. It's so good. And the Warriors always lose. She lost both bets. She was not happy.
She did.
She couldn't let it go. We were going to be like 2 hours
by
later.
1 point.
Yeah, exactly. She couldn't. And with the Warriors about 10 minutes ago, I was like, they're going to win this. So I put $3 on it, got $10 back. So I was pretty happy with that. And then, so the story about Sam and I. So Sam and I were doing my filming for my video. And one thing that's really fascinating, if you walk around town with somebody who's got a proper film thing, people are so nosy. Like, it's because we're doing it right in the center of town. And it's just really interesting how people are so attracted to it. But we're doing this, and these 4 little shitheads come up to us, probably about 12, 13, and little shitheads, and they're just asking stupid questions and wouldn't leave us alone. And then one of the kids said, "What would happen if I grabbed this and ran?" And I was over them by the stage, and I just said, "Oh, I'd turn around and I'd F you up," like quite seriously.
Tough
and
guy.
You could see Sam was quite shocked and dismayed. I went on that tone because I was over them. You know, they were cheeky boys, and I get it. I was probably one of those kids myself when I was a teenager. But when he said
overstepped the mark.
Yeah, he overstepped the mark. And the other kid goes, "What did he just say to you?" And he said he's going to F us up. And I was like, yeah, so bugger off, you crappies. Oh, annoying teenage boys, eh? You're going to love them.
Yeah.
I was definitely one of them myself at that age, so I can't be critical, but it's quite nice for them when they moved on, I tell you.
There you go. Good.
I tell you what, these kids weren't thinking about buying tramping gear, John.
Good times. Anything exciting happening for you this week, Bevan?
No, book project, John. Book project. I've got an official date coming out last weekend of June. I'm just working like a beast, to be honest.
Memo for you, Mother's Day on Sunday.
Actually, no, that's arranged. I planned a walk with my mother and lunch. So what about you? What do you do with your mum?
Yeah, I'll be doing that. Yeah, I've got to look after my not mother a bit more than my mother.
Oh, wait a second. Isn't the kids' jobs to look after their mother?
That's what we attempt. That's the theory. That's the theory. Anyhow,
right.
Back in the studios next weekend. I won't be breathing COVID all over you.
Okay, here we go. Wrap it up.
I'm Russ.
I'm Endo.
Train hard.
Train smart. Kia kaha.
Kia kaha.